Hello, thank you for listening to the Moist Boys Reviews. This is Josh. I just wanted to take a moment to tell you about the Anchor.fm app. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. It's free. There's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so you can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and many more. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Hello, everybody. Thank you for listening to the Moist Boys Reviews. My name is Josh. Today I'm going to be talking about the 2019 film Bombshell, directed by Jay Roach, acclaimed director of such films as the Austin Powers trilogy, the two of the Meet the Parents films, as well as Dinner for Schmucks. And you know that when you have a story about sexual harassment in the workplace, you want the deft hand of the director of Dinner for Schmucks behind you. And that kind of, folks, I'm not going to candy coat it. This movie really sucks. Pretty much every bad decision that you could make on a movie like this is made. It is really disconcerting to watch a film where genuinely terrible things are happening, but being soundtracked by a sitcom score with the sitcom bass going on, not like the Seinfeld bass, but more of the USA original programming comedy bass. A lot of stand-up bass going on here. So that's the best way I can explain it. In the theater I saw this film in, there are several scenes where we see characters, they're being harassed in the workplace. With the way it's played, there were people in the audience who were laughing uncomfortably because it is set up as a sitcom. And I feel like that is not the best way to go. The other issue with this film is that, so first off, I just want to say that Roger Ailes is one of the worst people probably ever. Just a real garbage human being. And most of the things he did, as depicted in this film and otherwise, just real bad, not great stuff. And yeah, and also nobody deserves to have that, what he did, happen to them. But at the same time, when you have real people like Megyn Kelly, etc., that worked at Fox News, lionizing them probably is not the way to go. Same for the Murdoch family, who are treated as heroes in this film. There are also some created characters that are set up to be incredibly sympathetic, and while they are in the sense of having to deal with Roger Ailes and the things that he did, I feel like the employees of Fox News are not the best people to make heroes out of. So yeah, it's really unfortunate. Particularly with as much public footage up there as we have of the people that work at Fox News and the types of stories that they do and the types of the sort of things that they pushed into the public sphere to essentially ignore those things to make them seem more sympathetic. I think it's a bad move. I think there is a way that you could say that even people that aren't perfect, or even people that do bad things, don't deserve that, but that's not what they did here. They went the easy route, or they tried to go the easy route and make everybody, all of the Megyn Kelly and Gretchen Carlson into to kind of heroicize them in a way that probably it does not gel with what's out there in the world. As far as the performances go, everybody's fine. Charlize Theron as Megyn Kelly is more distracting because of the appliances they put on her face to make her look different, which I think is more distracting than helping. I think if you just put Charlize Theron in the film as herself, looking like herself, and called her Megyn Kelly and gave her the haircut, I think that would have been fine. But they put gunk on her face that is very obviously gunk. Likewise, Nicole Kidman, there are several times when she looked like the Jack Nicholson Joker, and that was very unfortunate. I think if they just leave people alone, I think is the best way to go. It's always going to be more distracting to put people in makeup that is not convincing, rather than letting the actors stand on their own. Malcolm McDowell as Rupert Murdoch, I think, is probably the most convincing makeup, probably because he's only on scene, or he's only in a couple of scenes. They're mostly short, but also again, like, he is portrayed more positively than perhaps would make sense in a film like this. I definitely get the sense that in this film, Jay Roach wants to go the Adam McKay route of Vice, or I'm completely forgetting the other film, the Steve Carell, The Big Short. But Jay Roach comes up Big Short in trying to emulate that with this film. So yeah, folks, this movie sucks. There are also from some really, really distracting performances outside of the main actors. Allison Janney does a really bad accent as Susan Estrich, who I am not familiar with. Maybe that's how she is in real life, but in the film it comes off more as a comedy, and I think that's the real weakness of the film, is that you go from laughing at the film and these situations where people are being harassed, to all of a sudden you're supposed to take it seriously, and it never quite lands that never quite finds that balance. There is one other performance that I wanted to find, but I can't think of it off the top of my head. But that is the portrayal of Rudy Giuliani by Richard Kind. That is incredibly distracting because, again, you have sitcom performances in a film that should probably be taken seriously, particularly in the scene with Margot Robbie, who probably has the best of it in this as far as not being slathered in makeup, and also being a fictional character doesn't not have the same baggage that the other characters do. The worst and most distracting performance, though, is by whoever played Bill O'Reilly, because not only was it very obvious that it wasn't Bill O'Reilly, they did some really bizarre deep fake digital effects to try to pass him off as Bill O'Reilly, and it was not convincing in the slightest. It was incredibly distracting. The other distracting performance was by Mark Evan Jackson, who I typically like in comedy films, but he was not convincing. And this is Chris Wallace, because with the way his hair and makeup was done, he looked much more like Stephen Colbert than Chris Wallace. So that was distracting. Yeah, folks, don't watch this movie. It's uncomfortable. It on one hand portrays sexual harassment as kind of a joke, while at the same time deifying real people who probably shouldn't be, to make them seem more sympathetic when you don't really need to do that. You can have these people be true to who they really are, while still making it very apparent that they didn't deserve Roger Ailes to do what he did to them. So, fortunately for this movie, despite the subject matter that deserves a lot more, I'm going to give this 4 Clooney's for some of the performances, and pretty much nobody else deserves any credit for that, least of all Jay Roach. So yeah, don't see this movie. It's been out for a couple weeks now, but still, don't see it. Thank you for listening to Moist Boys Views. Folks, check out the Moist Boys podcast. We are entering the 2020 season with all kinds of new and exciting things. So check that out. Don't forget to rate, subscribe, share, all that fun stuff. There's a lot of movies coming out this weekend, so look forward to that, including 1917 and many more. So keep subscribed here, keep an eye out, and we'll be back next time. What's up, everybody? This is Josh, and you're listening to the Moist Boys Reviews. Today I'm talking about the movie that time forgot, Spies in Disguise, starring Tom Holland, Will Smith, Rashida Jones, other people that you would recognize from other Disney films. Essentially, this is the Disney film collection, and this film has all of the artistry and creativity that you would assume from a film that hires actors that they already know about, which is to say, none at all. The performers do fine with the material they're given. Will Smith plays a super spy that gets turned into a bird by Tom Holland's character, whose name I can't remember and do not care to remember, because nothing about this film is memorable. The jokes are stale, the writing is stale, the lesson is stale. You've seen this all before. There's no reason to watch this film other than any other film. Essentially, go watch literally any other animated film within the last 10 years, and you'll get what this film is selling. So, yeah, Will Smith plays a super spy that has to find Ben Mendelsohn's evil character, whose name I don't know if we learn throughout the film, because he's that forgettable a character. It's another villain with no backstory, no motivation, and no characterization until the last few seconds of the movie, and by that point it's too late. You don't care. I assume this film would be good for very small children that have no grasp on any kind of storytelling, but for adults, this film offers absolutely nothing. If you've seen an animated film, like I said, within the last 10 years, you have seen everything this movie has to offer. In an animated film, especially an action animated film like this, it's the action scenes that really sell it, and this film has essentially no interesting animation at all. The action scenes are poorly constructed, edited incredibly choppily. Essentially, you can't tell what's going on most of the time, because all the anything that would be intricately animated is chopped out to show you the result instead of the action of the scenes. So if you like your action scenes to be incoherent and not interesting to watch, then I guess this film would be for you. Possibly the worst thing of this film, though, is the original song by Will Smith. It plays a couple of times and gets more obnoxious every time you hear it. I'm going to give this film 2 Clooney's. It's not worth anybody's time. There's nothing, no redeeming qualities about it. Yeah, essentially, don't skip this one. Don't rent it. Even if it's free, just watch any other animated film I would recommend over this one. So, fortunately, no one remembers this film, and no one will mourn its passing. Thank you for listening to the Moist Boys Reviews. Stay tuned for more film reviews coming up. There's a big weekend planned. A lot of big films opening this weekend for me locally. So keep an eye out for reviews of maybe some good or at least passable films. Also, don't forget to check out the Moist Boys Podcast. You can find us on Instagram at Moist Boys Podcast. We have links, pictures, memes, all that fun stuff up there. Thank you for listening, and we'll get you next time. Hello, everybody. Thank you for listening to the Moist Boys Reviews. My name is Josh. In this episode, I'm going to be talking about the film 1917. It was released limited back around Christmas time, but is just now released in theaters wide, so everyone will have a chance to see it, including myself. The film is directed by Sam Mendes, co-written by Sam Mendes and Christy Wilson Cairns. The film is about 2 soldiers, played by Joel McKay as Corporal Schofield and Dean Charles Chapman as Corporal Blake. You might recognize Dean Charles Chapman from Game of Thrones. There are a couple of Game of Thrones alumni in this film. The story of 1917 is simple enough, and even if I were to explain it beat by beat here in this review, which I'm not going to do, it would still not alter the experience of seeing this film in the theaters, which I would definitely recommend. Spoiler for my final score at the end. But I would definitely recommend seeing this in theaters. It is definitely something to be experienced. In addition to our 2 main stars, there are several cameos by fairly popular British actors, including Colin Firth, who gives a fine enough performance. None of the performances are too flashy, except for one particular one, which would be Andrew Scott, who is great as always, brings a little bit of levity to a situation that otherwise does not have it. But in addition to that, you have Mark Strong, Benedict Cumberbatch, and Richard Madden are the recognizable names. If you have seen Game of Thrones or any of the other films, Benedict Cumberbatch probably the biggest name of those. Not necessarily cameos, but small important roles that fill out the cast of characters in the film. For those of you, I'm sure most of you are aware that the main story around this movie is that it was filmed to look like took place in one continuous take. That's not entirely accurate. There is a moment where things kind of shift slightly, and so it is essentially two uncut continuous shots that kind of take the film from one end of the battlefield to the other. In that way, I think in this film it does not feel like a gimmick, but in fact gives a kind of urgency to the film, since you know that everything that will appear on camera has to come from off camera. So there will never be a time when the camera will cut away to an establishing shot of another character. So during the times when the two main characters end up behind enemy lines, that gives it there's a level of tension there, that you know that whatever is happening, if you can't see it in front of you, it can still come from off screen to wreak havoc, which happens several times, and each time it is a harrowing experience. That experience is greatly enhanced by the score. I know that in the previous episode I did about Little Women, I had mentioned the score in that, and how that was, I thought, the best score of the year. But since this came out in 2019 for Oscar contention, I think that the score by Thomas Newman easily matches that score, in my opinion. There are a couple of really great moments where the music kind of takes over the film in a positive way, and brings you, pulls you into the story and into the feelings that the characters are experiencing. And that way, I think it is very effective. All the performances by our two main leads are both good, particularly George McKay. If you have, I've been aware of him. He's been in British films for several years now, and I've never seen him turn in a bad performance, and I'm going to include this one in here. He's very good. Dean Charles Chapman, also good, even though it can be at times hard to separate him from his role in Game of Thrones, which is the only other thing I've seen him in, even though I'm sure he's been in other things. So yeah, between the directing, cinematography, acting, and music, I think this is a very strong film, one that I would suggest seeing on the biggest, loudest screen you can find in your area. There are some really incredible shots in here, some of the best actual cinematography that I've seen, that doesn't involve entirely artificial scenes. So kudos to Roger Deakins. He is easily one of the best cinematographers working right now, and he definitely knows how to light a scene. So yeah, without further ado, I am going to give 1917 9.5 Clooney's. Definitely one of the best films of last year. Go ahead and see it now before the Oscars have been announced. It recently won Golden Globe. I think, though there are several films that could easily be in contention for that, I don't think anyone could argue that this one doesn't deserve to be in contention for the award season this year. Thank you for listening to the Moist Boys Reviews. Please check out the Moist Boys podcast. You can find out a bunch of cool stuff we're doing over there. Also, go head on over to the Patreon page, patreon.com/moistboyspodcast. We are also at Moist Boys Podcast on Instagram. We have all of our links there. We put up updates all the time, as well as at Moist Boys Pod on Twitter to stay up to date. Thank you for listening, and we'll get you next time. What's up, everybody? This is Josh. Thank you for listening to the Moist Boys Reviews. Today, this episode, I'm talking about Underwater, the newest film from William Eubank. You might know him from other films. The Signal in 2014, apparently, which I did not see, so I cannot make any value judgments on that. I'm just going to be able to talk about this film and how I felt about it. So this film stars Kristen Stewart, Jessica Henwick, T.J. Miller, Vincent Cassell, John Gallagher Jr., and I'm going to completely butcher this name, so I apologize to humanity in advance. Mamoudou Athie, I believe. You might recognize him if you watch British television. I know he's been in a lot of British shows and movies, so but yeah, it's a small cast of characters, a very bottle movie type of film. This film takes place in a in the Marianas Trench, deep under the water, in an underwater drilling site. The crew of the drill end up in some sort of calamity where their underwater station gets damaged and they have to make it out to survive. Pretty simple story. Things may not be as they seemed. If you've seen the trailer, you know that there is something out there that may or may not be out to get them. Not a whole lot to say about this film. It's a pretty basic premise. Essentially this film comes down to execution rather than any sort of elaborate plot. And on that sense, I would say that the filmmakers were mostly successful in creating a tense thriller here. And if I did have I have two main complaints about the film. The first being that there is a framing tool that they use, and I guess I can spoil it here. It's not a huge spoiler, but there is voiceover narration work from Kristen Stewart that I don't think it really goes anywhere or really adds to this story, and I found it more distracting than anything else. And I feel like if they had been cut out, this film would have worked just as well. And that would be my complaint on that. The other one would be that this film is it's more of a thriller than a horror film. There is not a lot of creepiness to it. There are several jump scares, a little bit of creepiness towards the middle to second half that works really well, that I would have preferred if they had leaned more into that than just straight up jump scares. Other than that, though, this does contain two of my least favorite things in movies, which are underwater scenes and scenes where characters have to crawl through skin-tight passages after the collapse of their underwater station. The pluses, though, I think as lightly sketched as these characters are, because this is not there's not a lot of character development here outside of this quickly as the film goes on. You essentially kind of get a sense of who these characters are. There's not a lot of time spent on backstory for anybody, really, except for maybe Kristen Stewart, Jessica Henwick, and John Gallagher Jr. Pretty much everyone else is just who they are trying to get out of the situation. But all the performances are good, particularly for those of you that watched Iron Fist on Netflix. It's always good to see Jessica Henwick appear in things. She does a good job here. Everyone does a good job. Essentially, Kristen Stewart is able to carry the film as the central character here that you follow throughout the film, and she does a good job, even if, as I said before, the narration does not particularly work for me. There is a twist at the end that I will not spoil here, but and it's not really a twist that you have to wait for that kind of changes anything. It's just the circumstances around the film change, and I really liked the twist that comes in here, and I thought it was a really cool twist. It maybe if it had appeared more in the film, I would have liked the film more, but as it was, I think it does what it does and does it particularly well. For whatever reason, this film got lost in the Disney purchase of Fox, so it was actually shot back in 2017, and it's now just being kind of dumped in January. But I think if you like tense thrillers that are well constructed and well shot, well acted, and outside of maybe some minor points here there, well written, then I think this is the film for you. So I'm going to give Underwater 7 Clooney's out of 10. Thank you for listening to the Moist Boys Views. Check out the Moist Boys podcast for more content every week, as well as the After Show podcast for those of you that are watching The Mandalorian or His Dark Materials. If you want to listen to a podcast about each of those episodes, you can head over to the After Show podcast. Thank you for listening, and we'll be back next time. What's up, everybody? Thank you for listening to the Moist Boys Reviews. My name is Josh. In this episode, we're talking about Like a Boss, starring Salma Hayek, Rose Byrne, Tiffany Haddish, Billy Porter, Karen Soni, Jennifer Coolidge, some other people that you might recognize and might not. This film was written by Sam Pittman and Adam Cole Kelly, with a story credit to a woman, so at least this movie has that going for it. Directed by Miguel Arteta, who has done other films such as Alexander and the Terrible No Good Film, The Good Girl, Youth in Revolt. I can say I've seen The Good Girl, and that was a real movie that had real stuff going on in it, which I cannot say for Like a Boss. It's definitely a different film. It's more of gross out, slapstick, crude, rude dude kind of film. So this film is rated R. There's plenty of drug use, language, no violence particularly, but that's about all there is about that. So yeah, I saw it in theaters with a kind of a small crowd. There were the audience for this film definitely did not reflect my appearance or being, so I might not be the particular audience for this film, but unfortunately for the film, after about the first 20 minutes or so, nobody else seemed to be into it either. So I will say that the film started off fine enough. There were some good gags, there were some good jokes at the beginning, but kind of when the story has to finally kick in about 20 or 30 minutes into the movie, that's when it kind of started falling apart, because as like the jokes stopped, there are a couple of light laughs in the back 2/3 of this film, but the theater I was in was mostly quiet in the second half of the movie. So do with that information what you will. I will say Rose Byrne and Tiffany Haddish do what they can with the material they're given. I believe Porter also turns in a fine performance. Salma Hayek is kind of a caricature of a character. Not much going on there. Not much going on in general in this movie. And essentially, if you've seen the trailer, you've seen the entire film, because it contains scenes from the last 5 to 10 minutes of this movie. Because like I said, there's not a lot going on. Like, once you see what happens in the trailer, that's when there's a very quick scene at the end, and then the credits start rolling. So if you've seen the trailer, you've seen the movie. If you've seen the Red Band trailer, you've pretty much seen all the best bits in this film. So after that, it kind of goes downhill. So if you saw the trailer and didn't laugh, you will not laugh in this film. Which is unfortunate, because it started off fine enough. Like I said, it's not my particular style of film, but at least it had something going for it for the first chunk. Rose Byrne and Tiffany Haddish at one point smoke some weed in front of a baby, and they drop the joint into the crib. And if you've seen the trailer, that scene's in the trailer, which is one of the better scenes in this film. So yeah, other than wishing that Rose Byrne, who is one of those actors that you kind of wish was able to get better parts, because over the last 10 years or so, I have not been particularly... I've been the biggest fan of the movies she's been in, which is unfortunate, because I think she is good in everything she's in. So yeah, if you're desperate for a movie to watch this weekend and you don't want to go into the big action movies that are being released, I guess this is something you could do if you have nothing better to do and maybe you have free tickets that need to be used up. Otherwise, I would suggest seeing something else. Overall, I'm going to give Like a Boss 5 Clooney's out of 10. Like I said, the first bit was fine, but it kind of, once the story of Salma Hayek trying to trick the two main characters into disliking each other, the film kind of falls apart, as the movie forgets that the main characters can just talk to each other, and it becomes less and less believable as time goes on. So yeah, 5 Clooney's, not the worst movie I've seen, not the best. Please check out the Moist Boys podcast for more content with myself and my co-hosts. If you are watching The Mandalorian or his Dark Materials, please check out the After Show podcast or his Dork Materials, depending on what the podcast app is calling it at the moment. I should be currently the After Show podcast. You can look that up. And thank you for listening, and I'll be back next time. What's up, everybody? This is Josh. Welcome to Moist Boys Reviews. From the director and writer of Syriana and the writer of Traffic comes his newest film, Dolittle. That makes sense, I guess. This film has 5 screenwriting credits on it, so that's always a good sign. The film stars, if you can call it that, Robert Downey Jr. It also features Michael Sheen, Jim Broadbent, along with Antonio Banderas in a small role. Voice actors Emma Thompson, Rami Malek, John Cena, Kumail Nanjiani, Octavia Spencer, Tom Holland, Craig Robinson, Ralph Fiennes, Selena Gomez, maybe a couple others. Yeah, so News has come out within the last couple of days explaining how bad Dolittle is. So even though I try to keep an open mind on films going into them and not read any reviews before watching it, I had seen that. And I was not expecting it to be as bad as it was. Pretty much anything that can go wrong in a film does go wrong here. The performances are mostly flat if they are on screen at all, or incredibly broad and off-putting. Robert Downey Jr. after this film will be, I don't know if he's known as the man of 1,000 voices, but after this one he should be, because you hear all of them in this film. I have no idea what his accent is supposed to be, but it is obvious from watching the film that it was all overdubbed long after the fact, because everything is done in a weird whisper and never quite gels with the film in a way that the other dialogue by the other characters so it never really pans out that way. Also, it seems to change from scene to scene, so you're never exactly sure what he's trying to do, but he's always doing a weird, sometimes it's Scottish, sometimes it's Irish, sometimes it's just British, but it's never convincing and never always whispered. Michael Sheen plays an incredibly broad German evil scientist doctor character. I guess it's not entirely clear what his role in the film is. He's one of the villains here. Along with, and this is not a spoiler because it's obvious from the beginning what's going on, unless you're a very small child. But Michael Sheen and Jim Broadbent are the villains in this film, and but it's not entirely sure why. Michael Sheen portrays the Doctor, and in the film we learn that the Queen of England has been poisoned, but apparently not by the Doctor. So that's confusing. There are two child actors in this. One of them is Stubbins, who exists on screen and is able to take up space and deliver lines, which outside of that, not much going on there, not much of a character. In the trailer, there is a lot of focus on a young girl character who, here we go, Lady Rose. She probably takes up more screen time in the trailer than the boy does, but you find out in the film that 90% of her screen time is actually in the trailer. Marion Cotillard, Jason Mantzoukas round out the screen voice cast. It's folks, this film is unpleasant from beginning to end, so it's hard to talk about it. I think even if anything else had worked in the film, which it doesn't, because it is ostensibly an adventure film, but you never feel like you're on an adventure. Everything is incredibly static at all times, with characters just suddenly appearing where they're headed to from a location that they are at. Specifically, when they first set out on their adventure on their ship, there are about 2 scenes on the ship that take place with them going in a direction, but mostly it's just the characters wandering around making bad jokes. You never get a sense that anything is going anywhere and then suddenly they're at a new location. Emma Thompson does a lot of voiceover work that kind of tells you what's happening on screen and or filling in the gaps that the film just didn't feel like doing. So yeah, the editing is incredibly bad in this film too. The most egregious example I can think of is that at one point one of the characters has to climb up onto like a rope bridge that's been built inside of a bedroom. But somehow when he gets halfway across the bridge, it turns out that there is a lion that's been sleeping behind him the whole time and then where he was going. And then he ends up just jumping through the air a couple of times, swinging down to the floor. But the way it was filmed and edited, you have no idea what's happening. And that's kind of every action scene in this, quote-unquote action scene in this film, of which there are very, very few. Most of this is just characters standing on green screens delivering either flat pablum dialogue and or just the most hacked jokes you could ever hope to see in a film. Craig Robinson plays a squirrel that you may have seen from the trailer, but his dialogue in the trailer is not the dialogue he has in those scenes, which is fine. You can do that with his character though, because he never interacts with anybody else, which is weird to have like his entire bit. And judging by what I've read about this film, it's very possible that he was added in after everyone else had already done their work, because the studio, Universal Studios, had gone back in and added a whole bunch of stuff, just random garbage into the film to try to make it better, which I don't think they succeeded in, which might account for some of the bad editing, where they were trying to just edit everything down to get it under 2 hours, but still kind of crap it out into theaters on time. But yeah, Craig Robinson's character is a squirrel named Kevin, who just recites real hack dialogue throughout the film and doesn't really interact with anybody. So it's incredibly bizarre that he is in there. Before he is voiced by Craig Robinson, that's kind of the inciting incident where the main child character, Stubbins, accidentally shoots the squirrel and has to take him to Dr. Dolittle. And that's kind of the inciting incident. But after that, he's just kind of a hanger-on that spouts just family-friendly jokes throughout the film. If you've ever watched the trailer for any family films in the last 10 years, you have seen all of the jokes that he spouts off in this film. So it's pretty unfortunate there. The really truly bizarre part, though, is that the more interesting film or more interesting story that this film has to tell is actually in a cartoon at the beginning of the movie, where you find out that in the prequel that Dr. Dolittle can talk to animals, and he went on a bunch of fun adventures, and there was a bunch of fun stuff. But we just get to see this big sad sack Dr. Dolittle, and then they go on a boring adventure where nothing much happens, and then the film ends. If you ever want to see a 15-minute scene where a man gives a dragon a colonoscopy, this is a good film to watch, I guess. If you want to see Robert Downey Jr. get elbow deep inside of a dragon and pull out this random detritus, this would be the film to watch, but I would not suggest that. Oddly enough, this film's score was done by Danny Elfman, a complete waste of time. Because there's no reason for any of this to exist. I would have to say that I cannot recommend any part of this film. It's mostly boring. Just the most hack comedy you could ever imagine. Like I said before, an extended colonoscopy sequence involving a dragon. No real sense of, like, the worst crime and adventure film can have is having no sense of adventure, and this has none whatsoever. I assume that the Universal Studios went in and just absolutely butchered this film apart for whatever reason, hoping they could make back their money on maybe tricking people into seeing it. But who knows why you would ever in 100 years want to do that. I'm gonna have to give Dolittle 3.5 Clooney's. I'm just gonna give that to credit those to Antonio Banderas, who was really the only actor that really showed up to be in this film. Everyone else kind of was just cashing a paycheck. So yeah, don't watch this film. It's a nightmare. It's a disaster. Mostly boring, bland, and/or bafflingly unadventurous. And also, I'd just like to tell movie studios, just because you do have de-aging technology doesn't mean you have to use it. This is another film where unnecessarily de-ages Robert Downey Jr. so he can have a flashback that we don't need to see and really doesn't do anything for the film. So yeah, don't watch this, folks. It's a disaster. Thank you for listening to the Moist Boys Reviews. Please check out the Moist Boys podcast for all kinds of fun content, as well as the After Show podcast for those of you that are watching His Dark Materials or The Mandalorian. Until next time. What's up, everybody? Thank you for listening to the Moist Boys Reviews. This is Josh, back with another episode, this time talking about Bad Boys 3 Life, the third Bad Boys film, following the 2013 Bad Boys 2 Life, and Bad Boys that came out in 1995. So it's been 25 years since the original, 13 years since the sequel. Now dumped in the middle of January. It's a film. Film directed by Adil and Bilal. 6 screenwriting credits, which is always a good sign. Yeah. 1 character credit, 2 story credits, and 3 screenplay credits. So I've not seen either of the 2 previous Bad Boys films, but I know, judging based on the audience reactions around me, that there are a lot of callbacks because of the number of times that people clapped and hooted and hollered in the theater while I was watching it. So I guess if you've seen those other 2 films, you'll recognize stuff with this film. Will Smith, Martin Lawrence, and Joe Pantoliano return as their respective characters. So if you've seen those, you know who that is. If you haven't seen them, then you probably don't care, because there's a new group in town of high-tech crime fighters, featuring Vanessa Hudgens and some other people, but it doesn't matter who they are because they aren't really characters particularly. There's not much to them, particularly Vanessa Hudgens, who's kind of just the person that's there, that's kind of a fan of Will Smith's character. Otherwise, they really don't have any impact on anything that happens. But honestly, you're not here for character or story or any of that. You're here for the jokes and the action. As far as the action goes, the action is fine. Maybe not so much the big showdown at the end, which is kind of disappointing and depends on a turn of character that is not convincing at all. So that is kind of disappointing. The jokes, again, the most hackneyed jokes you've ever heard in your life. These are. It seems so far in the year of our Lord 2020 that we are just recycling jokes from 2005 from the previous 2 decades and hoping nobody notices because it's all pretty stale material. Yeah. If you like Prius jokes, if you like jokes about how real men don't have emotions, if you like jokes about who knows, I will give it credit. I didn't notice any gay panic jokes, so I guess that has that going for it, but essentially otherwise not a lot going on here. My biggest complaint, though, is that this movie is about 20 minutes too long. There's a kind of half fine, half terrible action sequence in which Martin Lawrence and Will Smith are sitting in front of a really poorly composited green screen on a motorcycle. And then there's a big action scene around that, a lot of explosions, and a lot of stunt work going on. Then after that scene's over, I was ready for the movie to be done, but it continues on for another act. So this is like a 5 or 6 act movie, even though it probably only needed 3. A lot of stuff just continues going on and on and on, even past the point that it is entertaining. This movie also features a kind of cameo from DJ Khaled, and he's as good at acting as he is at satisfying his wife in the bedroom. So, zing on DJ Khaled. I had to do it to him. If you're a fan of these movies, I assume you'll like it. It seems to be pretty popular with fans of this movie. If you're not a big fan of the series, then you're probably not. So, I'm going to give this 5.5 Clooney's. Because it's technically competent. There's some interesting fight scenes. There is one of the fight scenes involving Will Smith doing a bunch of parkour stunts where it's pretty obvious that he's a digital composite and it looks really bad. So that's kind of distracting, but there are a couple of other scenes that are pretty cool. One of the kind of like the main assassin villain that is trying to kill Will Smith has a pretty cool knife fight sequence that unfortunately doesn't come back into play. So that's unfortunate. There's also a weird cameo by Michael Bay, who on the IMDb gets 4th billing, which is weird, above Martin Lawrence. So that's funny. So yeah, 5.5 Clooney is technically competent. Kind of a garbage screenplay, hack jokes, maybe 1 or 2 good funny moments, but for the most part, you kind of just groan and roll your eyes. And I will say, the audience that was kind of into it in the first half, by the time the second half rolled around, had quieted down quite a bit, and people, I think, were just ready for it to be over. So, like, once it reaches its natural conclusion in the runtime and everything kind of starts to deflate, you unfortunately get two more acts in the movie, and kind of just continues to go on long after it should have stopped. So, but yeah, 5.5 Clooney's. Thank you for listening to the Moist Boys Reviews. Please stick around for more movie reviews, and I'll be back next time.